I was listening to Dave Rubin on the Joe Rogan Experience the other day, and Dave Rubin, who now is more libertarian than ever, got into a bit of an argument with Joe about his stance on regulation and his idea that the amount of government regulation should actually be reduced.
Everything you're building here right now, right? Do you want the government to tell you how to do all these things and all the regulations that you got to have your electric thing this far from this and like all
the regulations like that for construction are important though. You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit.
But
make sure
generally,
you don't have a power line that's near a water line. There's a lot of.
But I would put most of that on the builders though. They want to build things that are good. Now I get it.
That's not true. Listen, people
people are going to build
corners all the time. Like you have to have regulations when it comes to construction methods, or people are going to get fucked.
They cut corners when there are regulations anyway.
They do. They would cut a lot more if there weren't regulations.
I'm not totally.
If you go to third world countries and look at construction methods, they're fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why schools collapse on kids in foreign countries sometimes.
Well, I'm not telling you that I'm against all regulation, period. That's where I said intellectually I like that argument because you could I think you can make a very sound argument that competition would force people to do better work. Like if you're a plumber, you have a vested interest in doing the best plumbing job you can so that people will rate you on Yelp so that you will get more work. You don't have a vested interest in cutting corners. Now you might, right? You're going to push it as much as you can to save as much time and energy and money as you can. Mm-hmm. But once you go over that edge, you don't want to be known as the guy that you tightened something too much so that you flooded the house. Or when you're building a house.
You're thinking logically though. When people fuck things up and short things and do things terrible, they're not thinking logically.
But I don't think it's the government. I don't think it's the government that they're like, the government gave me this regulation, so that's why I'm going to do it right.
Well, if they didn't have any regulations, there'd be no incentive whatsoever to do it right.
No, there would be an incentive.
If they knew there were no inspectors, no one was going to check their stuff and make sure that their stuff was up to code.
Now, Joe raises a concern that a lot of people have concerning a society where there is no regulation or where the regulation is greatly reduced. He says if they didn't have any regulation, there'd be no incentive whatsoever to do it right. If they knew there were no inspectors, nobody would check their stuff and make sure that their stuff is up to code. Now, the reason I find a statement like this to be a bit weird is because I immediately thought of a company that contradicts his own fear of a lack of regulation. And that company happens to be right on his shirt. See, Onnit is a company that has built their entire company around a value system. They're not just a company, they're really like a brand. They're almost a lifestyle. I mean, on their own website, they describe themselves as a leader in clinically studied supplements, earth-grown foods, and unconventional fitness tools. They've built their entire company on a reputation of transparency and natural ingredients. And they say that they're unconventional, meaning in some ways they're actually ahead of the curve when it comes to nutrition and fitness. But more importantly, a company like Onnit actually goes above and beyond regulation. To give you an example, Onnit has funded 3 studies, including one for their nootropic Alpha Brain, and all of these studies were randomized, double-blind, and placebo-controlled. I myself have seen many other nootropics sold online that don't have names like Boston University School of Medicine and Boston Center of Memory to back them up. But with no inspectors to check and make sure that Onnit supplements are legit, what incentive did they have to separate themselves from their competitors? Their incentive was creating a brand that you can trust because they funded double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies. It's a signal to the market that they're a brand you can trust because they're investing in these studies and hiring third parties to do it that are backing it up with science. Their reputation is who they are.
The people who are establishing these codes are licensed builders or people that have been involved in construction for a long fucking time, and they know what's safe and what's not safe. That's why those codes exist. Most people getting a house built, they have no idea about construction methods, and they need someone to inspect things and make sure that it's up to code. That's why code exists. It's very important.
With expertise and experience comes authority, but I don't think we need government regulation or government licensing to do the job for us. Once again, Onnit and the type of company that they're building has put them in a place to be an authority figure. There are people who want to be a certified personal trainer, and then there are people who want an Onnit Academy certification, which, by the way, is a certification that might not exist with government regulation considering their unconventional methods. Unconventional and regulation typically don't mix, which is why unconventional drugs like MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca aren't approved by the FDA, even though there's a lot of science to back it up. So on one hand, with regulation, you might get the safety that you think you wouldn't get in a free market. But on the other hand, you're also going to get the regulators stopping life-saving drugs from entering the market. A company like Onnit, to me, is like Whole Foods. They're essentially pseudo-regulatory bodies in that both companies without government in their face are going above and beyond regulation. When you go to Whole Foods, you're buying meat that's classified with Whole Foods animal welfare system. You literally know that when you're buying step 5 meat, that the chicken was carried upright in an enclosed space, which, by the way, the chickens have the option to go outside if they want to, but they're picked up upright in an enclosed space and carried upright by an actual human to a truck. They detail out every single step, and nobody's requiring them to do this. But the point is, you know Whole Foods values. And by extension, you know that other brands can't get into Whole Foods unless they're Whole Foods approved. When's the last time you walked into a Whole Foods and seen Snickers and a Coke? When you go to Onnit, you know that transparency and quality of ingredients is big. So there's no real concern when you're buying from Onnit that, hey, maybe my creatine's also laced with a bit of steroids, because that goes completely against who Onnit is as a company. And the bigger point here that some people might not get is that with companies like Onnit and Whole Foods, what they've essentially done is allowed me to outsource work. I no longer have to look into the foods, into the supplements, into the nootropics, because I'm outsourcing that work to individuals and companies and brands that I trust. This is something a lot of people don't seem to understand. They think that in a world of private regulation, all of a sudden individuals like you and me buying every product we may ever buy are now solely responsible for making sure that they're following regulations, that they're not putting bad stuff in it. This is something that can be outsourced and would be outsourced to a third party.
Because people don't have the time to spend all this time researching construction methods and making sure everything's done correctly and be there and make sure that the joists are a certain width and they have a certain amount of support. Like, all that stuff has to be done by people who understand code.
I don't want to do the work of studying all the nutritional aspects of all these foods and all these supplements. I don't want to do that. I don't want to look into the studies of what are the most optimal exercises for muscle gain or fat loss. Instead, I find people who are authority figures who I trust are being good people, who are being genuine, who are being transparent. I offload that decision making onto them so that I don't have to do it. I can just go, hey, Onnit, what should my workout be today? And then they say, do this. And I trust it because I'm into the same unconventional methods that they're into. I've done a little bit of research to establish, okay, I trust these guys. I listen to their podcasts. I read about their background. They've established trust, and this is the new type of business that we're going to see going forward. But to use the example in the podcast, I don't see why something like this can't extend to the world of construction as well. Companies that are known for doing great work with high standards could essentially become the regulatory bodies within their industry. And then other companies who are trying to prove their credibility, who are trying to make their way into the industry, can now get a seal of approval from these companies in the same way that health-conscious brands look for approval by being stocked in Whole Foods and not Walmart. And by the way, Whole Foods happens to stock Onnit products, similar values, and Whole Foods was just bought by Amazon for like multiple billions of dollars. So the market is sending signals that these are the things they want. This outsourcing to brands or authority figures when marketplace reputation matters more than ever is only going to be accelerated by the internet, which Ruben kind of alludes to.
People have a vested interest in, especially now because of phones and apps and Yelp and all of those things, doing good work, because that's how you will get more work.
I agree.
You're never going to remove the people who will do shoddy, shitty, malicious shit.
But you can keep them at bay with regulation.
Now, not surprising considering his libertarian point of view, but Ruben throws out the possibility that regulation could be privatized. And as a lot of people do, Rogan throws out the question, well, what incentive is there to be regulated when regulation is privatized?
And I've had construction projects where I had to explain to people and go through it with builders. They're making sure that the house doesn't fucking fall on you, that the power lines, are done correctly, that all the electricity is done correctly, the pipes are laid in correctly, your septic system or your sewage system is done correctly.
Yeah. Do you think that could be privatized then? See, 'cause again, I just think it's an interesting
regulations. Yeah. How would it? How
that
would
you could have
there would be no incentive.
Well, no, you could have companies that their job would be to make
inspect.
sure to inspect. Yeah, and you
but they wouldn't have the threat of law to enforce these things. Like if someone is building something and they're not up to code, they lose their license and they can't build.
Right.
If you privatized it, what's the incentive for them to follow the guidelines?
The incentive is that you don't have the seal of approval from the authority figure in the market. Going back to his construction example, because I've used examples like Whole Foods and Onnit, but to go back to his construction example, what would be the incentive to self-regulate? What would be the incentive for a construction company to regulate themselves by bringing in people who are going to check how they built the house, make sure they're up to code? Well, again, without regulation, people assume that the individuals would now be regulating, that I'm going to go up to a house and have to inspect the house myself. I imagine that insurance companies wouldn't insure buildings that haven't been pre-approved by a third party, right? Because when you're buying a house, insurance companies don't want to insure something that's a risk. So again, it's not like I'm going to be the person that's buying a house. I'm making sure everything is up to code. I'm measuring distance between electrical units. No, that wouldn't be me. The person who would be buying that service would be the construction company, because the construction company knows that they're going to build a house that a realtor is going to have to sell to a person looking for a house who is eventually going to get insurance. And they know that if they build a house that cannot be insured, the realtor doesn't want to be a part of it. And because the realtor isn't a part of it, the buyer is never even in the equation along with insurance. So the construction company, knowing that they need to sell their houses, would actually get the insurance because now there's a marketable seal of approval by a trusted third party that the realtor can market. They can sell it and say, hey, you have a house that's inspected by this trusted third party, and now you're going to be able to get insurance because the insurance company trusts them and they know it was built up to good standards. This is how things might look in a free market. Now, of course, there's going to be shady shit. There's going to be bad actors, but there's bad actors with regulation. You can get in bed with government and you can either skirt regulation entirely, or you get in bed with government and you actually write the regulation. You actually write the regulation that doesn't help the consumer, but it actually helps the businesses that are being regulated, because now they're writing regulation that pushes out potential competition. A good example of this would be ISPs, cable companies. They go into smaller towns and they write regulation that helps the consumer, but what it really does is it reduces all of the smaller players. It actually eliminates competition. And these laws, this regulation is written by companies. All of this would technically be possible in a free market. You could find the inspection company, the regulatory body, get in bed with them, get real corrupt. Of course. But that also happens when there are regulatory bodies enforced by the government. But with privatized regulatory bodies, if that information becomes public, reputations are destroyed. Elizabeth Holmes is going to have a tough time building her next business. But more importantly, you have the possibility of alternatives. When there's just one regulatory body of the government, if there's corruption, the solution is, well, I guess we have to fix corruption. But with a private market, you can at least switch to another competitor. There are options for you. You want a market where people can switch to other companies and choose to give their dollars to companies that have a proven track record and are transparent and have a good reputation and stay consistent with that reputation. Like most things where you want a good result, you want competition amongst regulators rather than a single regulatory body. And if you're still skeptical, ask yourself how you feel about a single regulatory body being run by this guy who repeals net neutrality.